chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission, Professor Mahmood Yakubu, has paid tribute to the late former chairman of the National Electoral Commission, Professor Humphery Nwosu, who chaired the NEC from 1989 to 1993 and oversaw the June 12, 1993 presidential election that was annulled by former military head of state, Ibrahim Babangida. The election is widely regarded as Nigeria's freest and fairest, which late Chief MKO Obiora was believed to have won. He died in October 2024 at the age of 83, and his burial is scheduled for March 28, 2025 in his hometown of Ajale, Orumba local government area of Anambra State. And so, on this conversation, focus will be on posthumous honor for Professor Humphery Nwosu, former chairman, National Electoral Commission, NEC. And our guest on this segment is Vinmartin Obiora Ilo, a journalist. Thank you, sir, for joining us.
Thank you, Ngozi, for having me.
First off, you have interfaced with the past NEC chairman who left office since 1993. And I'm sure he has shared his thoughts on that particular annulled June 12 election, 1993, and the elections that followed. What are those thoughts he shared with you, if you will?
Well, I was privileged to not only talk to Professor Humphery Nwosu as a journalist, but I was also opportuned to become his friend and was also able to share thoughts with him off camera. So until the last time I saw him was a couple of years back, he was still shocked by how that election had been handled. He didn't believe that with what had happened and how it had happened, that that election would have ended up in an annulment. And each time he spoke about it, he did so with so much passion and emotion. Because for him, his team had done so much to make sure that that election went well. And you know that he took office after his mentor had disagreements with the government at that time, led by Ibrahim. Emawa, actually, okay. Professor Emawa.
Oh, his predecessor.
His predecessor and his mentor. I think Emawa had taught him
political science
in the university. So he came to that position knowing that so much had to be done, knowing that Emawa and those before him had done so much. So one of the things he wanted was, what kind of foolproof system can I use? And there were a lot of conversations, a lot of discussions, until they came with the option A4, or the open ballot, as it has become known. So they did so much, stepped out from the ordinary, stepped out from the tradition, just to make sure that it went well. And then everything was going well. Because I remember in one of my interviews with him, he said, when these guys were talking about he said, look, everything is going well. I mean, so what is the problem? And you know, the soldiers, they even recollected an incident, an altercation with the then Chief of Army Staff, Sani Abacha. There was a big altercation between them. And he told me that, look, it had gotten to a point where he didn't care what happened to him. What was his interest was to ensure that that election, pulled through, and that Nigeria, started on a clean slate with a very successful election. So he was, many years after it had happened, still shocked and still disappointed that that election was annulled, because for him, there was practically no reason for the annulment of the election.
All right, that's on one part. You rightly pointed out that he was faced with the task of managing elections at an extremely challenging period of the country. You mentioned some of the options he chose to ensure a fair and free and fair election, but it's hardly mentioned that while talking about the June 12 elections, that he also already conducted other elections, and the participants, those who won the elections, were already sworn into office: local government elections, governorship elections, National Assembly and State Assembly elections, before the presidential election that was eventually nullified. How was he feeling at the time, knowing that he has succeeded at one part and something that was not the fault of his organization was the reason? Because nobody faulted him.
Nobody faulted the process.
Okay, so how did it make him feel?
Very disappointed. I use the word shocked. I remember that after we had the first round of interviews in Nigeria, I can't remember precisely now which year it was, but the next year I went to visit him in Maryland, in the United States of America. And I was in Maryland, and he came to my hotel with his son, and he took me out, took me to lunch, and we were out till almost time for dinner. Because at the time I had interviewed him, Humphery was like a forgotten hero. No journalist was looking out to talk to him. My interview was one of the major interviews he had, because at that time I was working for Africa Independent Television, AIT. So that program received a lot of interest. So I met him when he was, when he felt like he was forgotten, when there was this, I won't call it anger, because I think that Humphery Nwosu was a very calm person, but very firm in his ways, knew what he wanted and knew how to get results. But in my conversations, I saw a pain in his heart, because besides that those elections had been, that the election was annulled, which eventually ended up with Abacha collapsing everything.
Including a neck.
Everything. I mean, when Abacha took over, everything, all the governors and all the structures you talked about went to naught. And they had spent a lot of money. They had expended a lot of energy. So he was not a happy man.
Nigerians must have been disappointed at the time.
Very disappointed.
I mean, everybody was looking forward
June
to the transition.
Was a watershed in our history. I mean, for the first time, Nigerians rose, and they rose without anybody asking you whether you were an Igbo man, a Yoruba man, or an Hausa man. Everybody was involved. There were demonstrations everywhere, especially in Lagos. But then, I don't know, but a lot of Nigerians thought that was liberation. And then it ended the way it ended. That, of course, for a man who had expended so much energy, spended so much energy, and it ended the way it ended. And like you rightly said, not because anybody faulted the process, not because anybody said that the NEC, because that was what it was called, the National Electoral Commission, which he led at that time, had done anything wrong. They started talking about whether soldiers didn't quite want Abiola, whether this happened, whether that happened. And I remember he told me that they were going to have the Armed Forces Council meeting.
Armed Forces Ruling Council, it was
meeting.
called at the time.
Yeah. And he forced himself to the meeting. He went to the Attorney General to say, I don't understand what's going on. And he forced himself. And that was where he had the altercation with Abacha, who was then
I think Chief of Staff or something.
Army Staff, you know, because he couldn't understand what a bloody, as they used to say, civilian, what was his business. And Nwosu, for all he cared, didn't understand what they meant by, you know, looking for reasons where they were just looking for reasons to annul. And for him, he shared that in private conversation, well, it didn't make sense. Nothing that we are saying made sense to anybody. And then, before you knew it, they annulled, they decimated NEC and treated all of them for all they did with ignominy. It might interest you to know, except it happened just before he died, that since after he left NEC, his severance pay was not paid. He didn't get any money from the organization. Of course, he was never honored.
We will get to this last part of the conversation, but there is something. The former head of state, IBB, in his memoir said it was Professor Humphery Nwosu that announced the nullification while he was away somewhere else. That was what he said.
And it was who?
Humphery Nwosu that announced that the election has been nullified, and not him and not any military, and that he was surprised. It's something he penned down. I know that a lot of persons have argued this, given that his book was launched when Professor Humphery Nwosu was already gone.
It was bending history. So why would Humphery Nwosu annul the election? Why? Number one, he didn't believe in any of the reasons that were being advanced, and there was no problem with the election. He told them that they already knew who had won, that they were just going to announce it.
Okay.
And the soldiers said no.
It was looking like they didn't like the winner.
Well, those are the things that are coming. You know, this part will say some. Babangida would say that some members of the army leadership did not want Abiola. This person will. I mean, from what Nwosu told me, what they were saying didn't make sense. They just were looking, you know, like you're fishing for a reason to
hang a dog.
You know, and it was sad. I was a young man, a young boy at that time, and there was so much enthusiasm. I remember that the morning because everybody knew that Abiola had won, even though it was not announced, everybody knew Abiola had won. And I remember that one of the prayers I said that morning was, God, if this rich man is going to be also given political power, give him wisdom to move Nigeria away from our troubles. And you need to know the situation when this election took place and when it was annulled. We had been in a rigmarole with Maradona, President Babangida. You know, goalposts kept shifting, dates kept moving, Nigerians were tired. You know, it was a transition that never ended. So when 1993, when that election came, it was like Nigerians wanted to say, oh my God, so at last. And somehow...
Never happened.
No, somehow they thought they were going... for instance, the two people on the ticket of SDP were Muslims. The candidate of NRC was also a Muslim. But that was not an issue at that time. Nigerians just wanted the military to go away. And somehow, for the first time, they voted. And the soldiers, maybe they thought, they didn't know the election was going to be successful. They thought maybe there was going to be violence, so that they will have reason to either declare a state of emergency.
To cancel again, because before then there were cancelled elections.
Yeah. So, but it didn't happen. The elections were peaceful. Nigerians everywhere queued, followed whoever they were interested in supporting. So they didn't find a reason. So they were just fishing for one. And believe me, they never really gave Nigerians reason for annulling that election. And you can see even with Babangida's book, they're just... Nobody's telling you that it's just that, oh, this person didn't like Abiola. Abiola
both passing eventually. All right, decades after, the presumed winner of that election, MKO Abiola, was granted the highest national honor. Posthumously. And I recall sometime he was also named after some institution. I can't remember now if that stood. Even his running mate also was recognized with some national honor.
Second highest honor.
Sadly, the Electoral Commission that conducted this particular election, I'm sure that the election did not conduct itself. The unsung hero, Professor Humphery Nwosu, never got any mention, let alone national recognition of any sort. And now the incumbent person who is handling the INEC, what used to be NEC those days, is proposing that he also receive some kind of national honor or recognition. I don't know what your position on this
My position is that it's very sad. It's very sad because I remember that after my interview, which we aired, it was a two-part interview. Each was an hour long. And we aired it over 2 weeks on a program I handled at that time on the network service of AIT. It was called The Frontline. We aired it over 2 weeks. And it generated a lot of interest. And I remember that I had gone to New York to deliver a paper on, I think it was after the Buhari election, just after the Buhari election, when he was elected president. And I was in New York at the Center for Media Studies to deliver a paper. And somehow they asked me about the interview I had with Nwosu and what my impressions were, and I talked about it. And that organization reached out to him and brought him to a number of events that they had in New York. And that also kick-started an agitation both in Nigeria and outside Nigeria that Humphery Nwosu should be recognized, that Humphery Nwosu should be honored, that Humphery Nwosu's entitlements as a former chairman, including severance or pension or whatever, should be taken care of. But nobody did. No one did. And I want to commend the present chair of INEC. But I thought that those that had come before him should have raised this issue. Because we're talking about an institution. The institution was not even recognized for the job they did. And when Obiora, King Gibe, and when they also chose to make June 12th
a national day, Democracy Day.
Democracy Day. It didn't occur to anybody that somebody had cooked the meal, that an organization had cooked the meal. So I had, and that was one of the things I had said at that time, that even INEC as an organization should push for this. And most of the INEC chairmen that came after him knew that he and his team didn't get any of their financial entitlements after they were kicked out. Nobody did anything about it. They also knew that no honor had come his way. They couldn't even agitate for it. And now the man is gone. We are now saying posthumous. You know, it's just like what you see these days. Parents live in penury and they die. And their sons that are in America and are rich, they start building houses to show off to their friends. Because the man that is dead does not find any pleasure in what you do after he's gone. So it's sad. I feel so bad because as much as he told me in many interviews I had with him and conversations, no, I'm not sad, you know, my joy is that, you know, we had, I mean, he's a chip of the old block. They were among those public officers who didn't really care about what came to them, but were more interested in what they gave to the country. It was Nwosu who built the national headquarters of INEC.
The current national
I
headquarters?
don't know whether it's the major one, I don't know whether that's where they still are. But when nobody was thinking about it, after an election, some money was still in their coffers. Today's Nigerian public officers
will write it off.
Yeah, would, you know, write it off, put them to end up in pockets. That's how he went and got approval to build not just the headquarters, and build their quarters for INEC officials as they were coming to Abuja, and moved a lot of them. You know? So this was a man who was so much interested in what he could do for his country. But his country never thought about what they could do for him. And even now that he's dead, what is the participation of the federal government?
In his burial ceremony?
Yes. What is the participation? I'm not saying that they are not participating, but I'm saying, what is the level of participation? For a man like this, the country should stand still. Well, I've not in any of the functions, the burial rites. I didn't see the president, neither did I see the vice president. Maybe I'm not following. Maybe they came. I don't know how many of our leaders will be there when he's being buried. But this is bad, because what this does is that the younger ones, those that are still alive, those that are still in service, will tell themselves, why should I do this for my country when my country will not care for me? If Humphery Nwosu was not somebody who had worked hard, he would either have died in penury. But you know, he was an intellectual and academic, so when all these things happened, he still pursued his dreams in different ways, ended up in the United States. You know, he had a funny way of living in Nigeria and United States. When he gets cold, he returns to Nigeria. You know, stays. I think usually comes in like October or around that area, and then goes back about this time of the year when the cold is also disappearing. And he was a very fulfilled man.
Good to know.
Fulfilled man.
Good to know.
I'm sure he died with that tiny regret that his nation did not recognize him or honor him.
Some persons have proposed that he be honored by naming him after the headquarters you mentioned. I don't know if there's a new one, or there's some renovation, but he be named. But asking you now, what kind of recognition would you wish for him? Posthumous, albeit.
Well, what has happened has happened. He didn't. I mean, it would have been nice if Humphery Nwosu was at the State House and standing in front of whoever was president at that time, and he was honored.
A medal,
During his lifetime, and he was honored. It would have been so nice, but it's still okay. What I think is that the federal government should find a befitting way to honor him.
Naming him after some institution.
Well, maybe naming some institutions after him. That could be a way to do it. Maybe naming a university after him, because he was an intellectual. He was an academic. Or naming whatever it is. But Humphery Nwosu, and if it is possible, whatever he was owed should be paid to his family. I know they may not need it, but they can use it and do a foundation, an endowment for him, whatever. He should be honored. The government should. The government, what we see in Nigeria is somebody is a governor, you build things and you name them after yourself. Or the president is there, then governors that are currying for favor do things and name. And this is a man, and it's so sad that even in the southeast, in Enugu, in Anambra, in Imo, Abia, in Ebonyi, nobody ever remembered Humphery. Not even in his own state of Anambra State. So I've heard some people say, they're doing it because he's an Igbo man. It is not true. What did Igbos do for him? Was it something wrong if the governor of Anambra State, 1 year like that, had an elaborate, like his birthday, an elaborate ceremony, honored him? Honor is honor. But that didn't happen. Not from his brothers, not from his kinsmen, not from his state, and not from his country. It's a sad thing because the younger ones are watching, and they may not want to, sacrifice, hoping that their country would appreciate.
All right, now, he championed what has become a mantra now, free and fair election, and to a large extent, credible, because nobody went to court, nobody was contesting anything, and the annulment came. I don't know how, he just passed. He passed in October, sometime in October, I think October 24, 2024.
October 20.
20, okay, so that's a couple of months from, a couple of months now. How do you think he looked at the conduct of elections since 1993? One happened in 1998.
I remember that I had asked him, I don't know whether it was in one of those interviews or whether it was in private conversation, but I remember that I had asked him, they say the election you conducted was the freest, fairest, and most credible election in Nigeria. And I asked him, has any of the chairmen that came after you, has any one of them contacted you for advice?
To tap from his knowledge, his wisdom.
And he said, unfortunately, no. I think there was one he said had come to ask something, but not in the manner one would have thought that for a man who had so much to offer. He said, no. So that tells you how we treat the assets we have in this country. Somebody comes to INEC, somebody becomes a governor, somebody becomes a director general in a parastatal. They want to turn everything. Nobody's asking, how was it? What made this possible? Very recently, I asked one of my mentors who had served at INEC. I asked him, I said, sir, why are we not going back? What, I mean, everything has failed in terms of election, biometrics, name it, blah, blah, blah. I say, sir, is it not possible for us to go back to open ballot, option A4? I say, sir, in my village and every village, almost all over Nigeria,
town union elections
is done by option A4. And it works. And it's not costly. So, and he took time to explain to me what had happened and all that, and why it might not be very feasible now. Because he told me that, for instance, that with option A4, after, which made them move from option A4 to what they now call the open ballot system, that after the elections, the local governments he talked about and some of those other elections, that people that wanted to litigate, people that wanted to go to court, didn't have evidence. There were no documentation with option A4. Okay, and all that. I mean, it was a long conversation. All right, but my argument is still that this is what worked for us. We can improve on it. We can improve on it. Because some of the critics said people were unduly exposed to danger because you knew that I didn't vote for you. So there's a tendency that people can be attacked, people can be victimized because of what they did. But the other people that speak for that system also say that it eliminated a lot of corruption. So you didn't have to go and take money from somebody in the night and go and vote in A. So it made a lot of, almost everybody a little more careful. So I still feel that since we said this was so successful, and it's still something we use, that there could be a combination of that and some kind of technology to make it feasible. Because elections are costing us so much money. So much money. Because you hear them say that an election, 2019 election took, I'm just saying, took 30 billion or 300 billion or whatever billion. You find out that probably what went into that election was about 30% of it. The other ones were taken by corruption. But if we had option A4 and then we clean up the documentation processes and what have you, maybe it would have been cheaper for our country. Maybe it would be easier because with option A4, everybody knew who won. I remember in my village when we were electing a traditional ruler. One man who was also running had only 4 or 5 people queued behind him. And then the man that won, his line went like in circles and in circles. So how do you rig that kind of result if we have a process of documentation that makes sure that what we get at the election point is what is transmitted at the end of the day? So I think that the country and those that have come after him have not really tapped from his resourcefulness and the resourcefulness of his team at that time. And it's not late.
And it's not late. Vinmartin Obiora is joining voices with prominent Nigerians who are advocating that Professor Humphery Nwosu be immortalized. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Save Nature TV. News in your pocket.